So, in my ride replacement series, one of the options on my list is what'll take the place of Pandemonium at Six Flags Fiesta Texas. I've felt for years that this is a prime candidate to get moved to another park, and free up room for Fiesta Texas to get something new. Now that the park is teasing a 2022 attraction, I think now is the time to dive into this topic. Fiesta Texas serves as Six Flags testing ground lately, with Iron Rattler being one of the first RMCs, Batman the Ride being the first free spin, and Wonder Woman opening as the first single rail Raptor. Pandemonium dates back to 2007 and is tucked away in the Fiesta Bay Boardwalk section, with access to the ride coming from a bridge over the go-karts. Fiesta doesn't have a ton of room to expand outside their parking lot, and the quarry wall boxes them in throughout most of the park. Let's say they move Pandemonium to another park and reuse the station for this new 2022 ride. What could we be looking at? These are the prime candidates to replace Pandemonium. Pandemonium sits on a modest footprint, 263 feet by 105 feet, but there is a lot of space around it, especially to the north and the east. I think Six Flags would consider using this land for a bigger coaster, or they may stick to the Pandemonium plot and use that land for something else later. The options on the table cater to both scenarios. If they were to go all out and use all that empty land, the footprint expands, 836 feet by 288 feet. So what is the park missing? Their most glaring gap is the lack of a wooden coaster. Rattler closed down in 2012, and by then, Six Flags' interest in building new wooden coasters was pretty much gone, with the exception of Goliath, which RMC convinced them to build. If they were to spring for a wooden coaster, this plot is made for a Mystic Timber style out and back coaster. Mystic is a little on the long side, at 1,020 feet by 113 feet. I know it's a lot wider from its station to lift, but the way this runs out and back makes for a very narrow footprint, and that could easily fit here with a custom layout. Despite their cheaper price tag, I think post-bankruptcy Six Flags has realized that the upkeep that Woodies need more than offsets the savings they get up front. So unless something changes, I don't think a Woody is in their future, even though Fiesta Texas needs it. Another need for the park is a B&M Hyper. These also fit on long skinny plots of land, and there's even some space beyond this plot, leading towards the parking lot. And that seems to be made for an out-and-back Hyper, like Intimidator or Behemoth. Fiesta Texas could also use a floater airtime machine, as this was one of the parks that was not blessed by a Hyper when Six Flags was buying them in bulk in the early 2000s. I wouldn't expect this now either. Hypers seem way out of Six Flags league financially, especially for a park like Fiesta Texas, which is more about experimentation and less about major landmark investments. If Six Flags doesn't do wooden coasters anymore and doesn't want to pay for a large-scale B&M, what do? They work with RMC, but Fiesta Texas already has two. They work with SNS, and the park already has their free spin. They also work with Premier Rides and Zamperla. Their selection of manufacturers and their budget limits them a lot more than SeaWorld or Cedar Fair. So what could the park use that Six Flags would actually buy them? How about another launch coaster? Poltergeist serves that need right now, but that's more about the inversion-filled layout than the launch. This is apparently getting a facelift in 2022, so there's no way this is going anywhere anytime soon. But there could be other launch coasters that provide a different experience, maybe something more about the launch than what comes after. Let's see how Max Force fits here. We're looking at 668 feet by 197 feet. An absolute perfect fit with a buffer to spare on all sides. I think the park could use it, and the dimensions work out, but it really doesn't need a launched inversion machine, even with a powerful launch that they can market as the strongest in America. Another launch option is the Premier Ride Skyrocket 2. Six Flags bought the first one, Superman Ultimate Flight at Discovery Kingdom, and then they never bought another one. SeaWorld became the company that was loading up on these clones. These stand on skinny plots of 232 feet by 89 feet, which would be a perfect fit to replace Pandemonium if they went in that direction. Premier Rides does offer other options, but it seems like those would be too similar to Poltergeist. Moderate launches and a layout full of inversions. Not exactly a gap the park needs to fill. If they took out a family-style coaster, would they replace it with another? That would just leave them with Streamliner Coaster and Roadrunner Express, and I think something like a family suspended coaster makes sense. If not Vekoma, then SNS can make one just like Merlin's Mayhem. This stands on a plot 307 by 248 feet, which would extend the Pandemonium plot just by a little bit. The thing that drives me away from the Skyrocket 2 and the Family Coaster is the fact that the park is already hyping that 2022 attraction. They wouldn't hype a clone or a family ride. This is either going to be a thrilling coaster or some other very impressive attraction. You can see from the blimp that it looks to have some kind of steampunk theme, which gives us somewhat of a clue what it could be, and it's using the tagline, "The gates of fear will open." I know I'm making a bit of a leap tying Pandemonium's possible removal to this 2022 edition. But hey, I'm going out on a limb. I know I could be way off. I wouldn't rule out the mock ride's Big Dipper. Six Flags just put in a mock power splash at Over Texas, and maybe they could negotiate something like Lost Gravity for this plot. At 287 feet by 175 feet, it would just need a little bit of a bigger plot than Pandemonium currently uses, and it could be a coaster worthy of the hype. This may be a bit of a long shot, but at least keep the option in the back of your mind. Same thing with the Zamperla Thunderbolt. Very, very unlikely, but the length of these fits within 3 feet of the total space available, and it's skinny, so it can run right along the quarry wall. Six Flags just ordered a Zamperla spinning mouse for Discovery Kingdom, so you never know what kind of backroom dealings these companies have with their manufacturers. We also have those new age Vekomas that could work here. I could see a launch model go in here, like a Top Gun, even though that's more of a square plot at 422 by 334 feet, and that would have a hard time fitting even the extended plot. Or they could go with a Firestorm, which would actually fit perfectly, with room to spare lengthwise. I could also see the lift hill models going here also, like a Bermuda Blitz that would take up a fraction of the total space available, or a custom hyperspace warp, which could be configured for as much land as they wanted to use. Vekoma hasn't introduced any of these to North America yet, but you have to imagine that someone will break through to their parent company Sansei, and they'll allow it, and the floodgates will be opened. Vekoma and SNS have the same parent company, and SNS gets most of the American projects, but there are things that SNS just doesn't do, and that would require Vekoma to cross the pond and get it done themselves. But there is one model that I've been saving for last, the one that I think is the most likely option, and if you've watched this series, I usually bring up this one as a wild card, kind of a what if option, one that could be cool, but I think will never happen. This time, I think it can happen, and I think it's the most likely thing to happen. Steampunk, a sinister theme. I see all this tying into the SNS Access Coaster. It makes so much sense. SNS is clearly ready to start building these, following the 2020 debut of the prototype at their plant. It falls right in line with the park being the testing ground. Six Flags works more closely with SNS than anyone else. It's a marketable ride that would be worth the hype. It would fit perfectly in the back of the park where Pandemonium is. The dark and sinister theme doesn't seem to fall in line with the Fiesta Bay boardwalk, but they may retheme it to a haunted boardwalk. Or maybe once you cross that bridge over the go-karts, you'll enter a whole new world that'll freak you out. If you want my second and third options, I would peg some kind of custom launch coaster from SNS or Premier Rides. The Axis can also be a launch, or maybe it'll have a lift, or, crazy idea, maybe it'll have both, in whatever order. An Axis would immediately make Fiesta Texas a destination for coaster enthusiasts, while still being gimmicky enough to bring out the general public in droves. Let me know what you think is coming to Fiesta Texas in 2022, and whatever it is, will it replace Pandemonium? And if not, let me know if you think Pandemonium could be on its way out soon, and what could replace it when it's gone. Do you think the Axis is the obvious answer here, or are you looking at another option that I overlooked? Sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like. That's the best way to show your support for the channel. And if you're new here, and love talking about coasters getting the axe, be sure to sub, and check out my ride replacement playlist for other theories that I've had across North America. And be sure to check out my links below for my Discord server, where you can chat with other fans of the channel, as well as my second channel, where I post copyright-free off-ride footage. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.